Hey there, today I'm sharing with you my conversation with Matt Steen of Chemistry Staffing. Now at Chemistry, their goal is to help churches find great staff members and staff members find great churches. Now we get into a conversation about the hiring process, what to do before you write that job description, and the parts of the process that are even more important than the job interview itself. So if your church has found itself in a hiring cycle lately, and I think a lot of churches are, then you're going to want to stick around because Matt's going to give you some can't miss tips, and we're going to get into those right now. Hey there, my name is Mike. I'm a church helper, and my goal today is to help your church make every decision on purpose. Now, this episode is going to be really great. And to make sure you don't miss the next one, I'd love for you to hit that like and subscribe button right now. It really makes a difference to us over here, both as an encouragement and to know what to put out next. Well, you're in for a treat today because today my guest is Matt Steen of Chemistry Staffing. Matt has served the local church for over 2 decades as a youth pastor, a church planter, and an executive pastor. Matt has a BS in youth ministry from Nyack College and an MDiv and an MBA from Baylor University. He's certified as an urban church planter coach by Redeemer City to City and as a Strat-Op facilitator from the Patterson Center. Now, Matt has made a career of helping churches thrive through intentionality, clarity, and creating healthy cultures. He is convinced that a healthy church is led by a healthy team with great chemistry and loves partnering with Chemistry's churches to do great things for the kingdom. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Matt Steen. Well, hey there, Matt. Thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, man. This is fun, man. I'm excited to spend some time with you.
That's good. So for people that don't know who you are, can you just start with that? A little bit about yourself and then how sort of chemistry happened, what that path was, and how you got to where you're at.
Yeah, how chemistry happened. That's a great way of putting it. So I'm currently living in Orlando. It's my wife Teresa and I are here with a 2.5-year-old greyhound.
Okay.
Who, Nellie says hi. We been here for about 2 years, and but I've been serving with churches for 20 some odd years. We'll leave it at that because anymore I feel old, but served as a youth pastor, was an executive pastor, planted a church, did all the things. But one of the recurring themes in my life is I constantly had a side project that was in the capital C church, and just to help me see what was going on outside the walls of the church that I was serving in. And the last one of those projects was chemistry. We launched chemistry about 5 years ago. 3 years ago, I jumped into it full time, but really it was one of those responses just to, frustration and anger,
Right.
like all good things that start or somehow, you get mad at something and say, we need to go fix this, never thought that I would be the dreaded church headhunter.
Right.
But what my co-founder and I, we really came to the realization, we're both church geeks, and it's just like we want to see churches get healthy, and the low-hanging fruit for us was finding people that would be in place for the long term.
Right.
So I don't know what it is up north of the border, but down here, average tenure of a pastor is about 3 years.
Right.
And so we figured that if we can get it to 5, just the stability that comes from that is so good for the kingdom.
Right.
And so that's really what kind of drew us into this. And like I said, first couple of years, it was a part-time role for me as I was serving as an executive pastor. And then we came to the point where it's just like, this is taking off. So we either need to jump into this full time or we need to dial it back. And so, this is the rest, as they say, is history, I guess. So it's been a fun run, man. Most days it's the greatest job ever. So
I mean, I've really enjoyed, you and I got to know each other a couple of years ago. You were on a thing with Rich Birch, and I think I reached out and we just chatted, and that was great. And I've enjoyed following, everything that you've put out since then. And if people don't stick around through the whole interview, go to the web. The amount of resources you just have on your website for hiring and candidate search are unbelievable. So I really appreciate everything that you guys have done there. It's unbelievable.
Thank you.
I love engaging with it. And so
Yeah.
I'm so happy to have you here today, because obviously we both know we're going through a season where pastor turnover is extremely high in all positions, right?
Mhm.
I mean, all ministry positions turnover is quite high. You know, you and I were just chatting a second ago about how a lot of people are exiting ministry,
Yeah.
almost as many as you're trying to find new positions for. And so churches are stuck in this spot where they're constantly in almost a hiring cycle. And maybe they've got their senior pastor in place, but then their youth pastor goes, or maybe they've got those two persons and then their children pastor goes, or their worship. Like it always seems
Right.
like a lot of churches that I'm talking to are in a hiring cycle. And it's very reactionary.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to, have a conversation with you to say, when churches are starting that process, what are sort of those first steps? What should they be looking for? How do you begin that process well and
Yeah.
carry it through to a place where you've really got a good candidate or a good option at the end?
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple things, right? We say this a whole awful lot, but youth pastor, whatever role comes into your office, sits down and says, "Hey, I'm out."
Right.
The tendency is to go on to whatever job post site immediately after they leave your office, and put up the old job description, put up the old posting, and right away let's try to refill that.
Right.
And I get why you do that, but that's probably that's probably the worst thing that you can do. And so a lot of what we tell people to do is just kind of sit down, breathe, just
take a minute,
take a minute, count to 10, whatever it is that, but just kind of sit and soak in it for a minute.
Right.
Learn from that. We put together, a playbook for when people kind of leave. And it's just, the big thing there is before you do anything, you need to have an exit interview with that person, right? Talk to them about their experience, learn from that, and then the next thing, isn't go and post it. It's, breathe again, right? You'll hear this time and time again, but then start to ask some hard questions. It's like, is that role what we need as a church now? Do we need to step back and ask some hard questions about, where are we now as a church? How have we gotten to this point? Does our future, does our vision rely on that role in order to be successful? And if not, it might be a question of, okay, so what role, what would be a better hire there, right? There's no rule out there that it's like you got to refill the exact same position over and over again. Whenever somebody leaves your team, you want to mourn that. You want to send them off well. You want to, sometimes you want to celebrate it, but you don't do that publicly. But just saying, it's real. But ask the questions. It gives you a natural point to be able to stop and take a look from a higher level and say, okay, so what is the next best thing for us? What is our next best step? And the other piece of this is just keep in mind, God's not surprised that this person's left. This is sometimes when we forget our theology, we start to panic. God is not surprised by this. God is still, last I checked, he's still on the throne. He's still, guiding all of this and has a pretty good idea of what's going on. So, this is one of those times when, panicking is gonna hurt you, right? And so take the time, ask the questions, step back. Sometimes there needs to be some reorganization. I'll share some, resources with you. We got a reorganization playbook that's good to ask at these times. It's right. What's working in that area? What do we need there? Those types of questions, but take advantage of that. And really ask some of those hard questions ministry wise. So that's where I would start. Right. I mean, we can dive into some of the things around, how do you do a search or what are you looking for and that kind of stuff that's helpful. But I mean, does that make sense so far?
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. Just being very, very intentional about what your next move is. Right. I think we've seen that a lot. You see, maybe the same position go through 2 or 3 people in a row. And then, you say, oh, well, maybe we just haven't found the right person yet, or do we need to tweak the job description, or, hey, we know somebody, maybe we'll tweak the job description to fit that person. Have you seen a lot of that? Like, have you seen that before?
Yeah, and sometimes it's a wise call, but most times it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you might have a job that you're crafting in a certain way, and all of a sudden you find somebody that not only can do that job but can also do a bunch of other stuff that the church needs.
Right.
And in those cases, if everything else lines up, then by all means expand the job description, tweak it for that person.
Right.
But if you're at a point where you're just kind of getting desperate and this guy and they're nice, they're not quite everything that we want.
Right.
But bless their hearts or whatever it is that you guys say north of the border. It's just like, let's take a chance on them. A lot of times that leads to frustration.
Right.
And if you're in that situation where you're going through people, maybe every 3 years or so, and you're just waiting to find the right one, and you're just not sure. I tell people sometimes, if the smell keeps following you around, you got to check your shoe.
Right.
And maybe it's not the people that you're hiring, but maybe organizationally you got some hard questions to answer.
Right.
Because if you don't need somebody to do whatever, if you really don't need somebody for that role, it doesn't matter how amazing they are. They're not going to help what it is that you're trying to do organizationally as a church as a whole. If you keep hiring youth pastors and the big weakness and the big glaring hole is in your children's ministry,
right,
that's not going to get fixed. Right. It just isn't, unless there's some miraculous, whatever. But so that, take the time, be intentional, and really kind of lean in and figure out what it is that you genuinely need as a church.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and this is, you didn't ask about this, but this is for free. So, one of the things that we're looking at down here, and some of what we're encouraging our churches to rethink is how heavily staffed they are.
Okay.
So what we're seeing is, with everything that's going on, COVID wise, with everything that's going on society wise, there's a lot of people that are leaving ministry.
Right.
And for good reasons, for burnout reasons, for people are just kind of waking up and saying, I just can't afford to be in ministry anymore.
Right.
And so some of what we're encouraging churches to do is say, hey, can we consolidate some of our roles? Do we, if we're a church of, 300, do we really need 4 or 5 full-time staff?
Right.
Or instead of paying 5 people to be on our full-time staff team, what if we got some really sharp generalists that could oversee and develop people, mm-hmm. and release them on our team, and then we're able to pay them better,
right?
So that we're not in competition with Jeff Bezos.
Right.
I don't know what Amazon's doing up there, but I mean, it's like you can make 45 and get really good benefits, and they'll pay for tuition down here. And the cool thing is, Jeff Bezos doesn't call you at 11:30 on a Friday night saying the worship was too loud, right? And so one of the things that we're encouraging churches to do is let's rethink what we're paying. Do we really need to be staffed at the level that we are?
Right. Do
we need to rearrange some things and find some people that are more developers and release ministry to volunteers? But that's probably a whole different trajectory than what you were thinking we were going to be talking about. So
no, I mean, that's great, because it's, I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot too, as we've helped churches is, I mean, first of all, just how quickly ministries get siloed when you get people who are experts in an area.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you shouldn't have people that are an expert in a particular area.
Right.
And then 2, how dependent a church can become on the staff, right?
How
the church grows, and then it grows in staff, and it grows and grows in staff. But then if the church, shrinks a little bit and the staff team goes down, all of a sudden everybody's going, well, we used to have somebody that did that. Now we don't. Now we can't do that anymore.
Right.
But that's just not true.
Right.
Those people just need to be developed. Is that right?
Well, it's maybe we can't, or should we?
Right.
If we go from a church of 500 to a church of 100, do we need to have the same level of programming? Is that wise?
Right.
And at that point, that's a point where we can ask, hey, one of the best things about COVID for churches is they've been able to shed some of the sacred cow ministries that, had been just kind of limping along for years, and pardon the phrase, were resource hogs,
Right.
Taking up time and money and who knows what else. And for churches to be able to say, we just can't do that. COVID has been a blessing for the savvy leaders that have been able to axe that kind of stuff, because there's stuff that, hasn't worked since 1964.
Right.
That because we're the church and we don't like to kill things,
Right.
Has just been limping along. And so maybe we don't need to do some of that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And so we can reallocate those resources. But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of things that, we really, as a church, need to be developing and releasing people to go minister, and if we don't have the volunteer base to be able to go support some of these ministries, then a question should be, hey, do we really need to be doing this if we really don't have any support? Or, have we lost sight or lost track of how to be able to prepare and release people to pursue ministry in this way? We keep talking about, the three things. I went to seminary, so it's got to be an acronym, right? So we're talking about padding your staff team. So we're encouraging churches now to look for people who are pastoral.
Okay.
Because when we get into that specialist, we think, oh, I just do graphic design, I don't have to pastor people, right?
Right.
So pastoral, we're looking for people who are agile, because who knows what the next apocalypse is going to look like,
right.
and how that's going to change things. And so they need to be able to shift on the dime. And then we're looking for people that are developers. They don't have to be the one that's up on stage. Right. They don't have to be the one that's doing everything. What they need to be doing is they need to be training people to own ministry and to lead ministry, and to be able to go out and shepherd people while they are, pastoring them. So that's what we're encouraging people to look for. Because I think that bodes well for the church, especially, most churches are less than 500.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Especially those churches, especially churches of, 70, 80, 100 people. The congregation really needs to be leading out some of this stuff. And so we need people that are equipping them to do that. So I can preach on that for days, man.
That piece is interesting for me, especially the developer piece. I was talking to a pastor about a year ago who was talking about the process that a lot of the churches that he knows go through. And one of them is that a new candidate is asked to sort of rank 1 to 10 or 1 to 15, sort of a bunch of their skills, right? Mm-hmm. Pastoral and preaching and going out and all of this stuff. This isn't the only person that's told me this, but he said, you always put preaching 1 and you always put pastoral care 2, even if that's not what they are, right. Because that's just what everybody wants to see. But part of that is that's what everybody wants to see. People aren't used to that idea of, well, maybe actually a behind the scenes person, especially in that lead role, could really be a benefit. Do you see candidates fudging their own resumes or shading towards what people think, instead of having the opportunity to just be honest about who they are, so a church actually knows who they're getting?
Yeah. Well, so candidates are playing to the crowd, right? Ultimately,
and that's part of being a candidate, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Part of being a candidate is marketing themselves, right?
Yeah.
They need a job. They see your opening. They're going to read, and this goes back to some of what we were talking about. It's just they see what a job description says, and they're going to say, okay, if they're smart, they're going to say, oh yeah, I can do that,
right?
If they're smart, they're going to go and they're going to tailor their resume and their cover letter to what they see on the church's website, to what they see, on the church's job description. And if they're going to do their research and they're going to say, oh yeah, I love preaching, oh yeah, I love doing pastoral care, those types of things, because this is crass, but hey, they're looking for a job. They got to pay their mortgage, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a big part of what they're going to do. Now, the funny thing is, a lot of times what the church is putting out there on job descriptions, what the church is putting out there on their website and their ads may or may not necessarily be what they want.
Mm,
or need, going back to what we're saying, but it
sure.
may not be what they want. And one of the things that we see a lot of times is it's like, hey, we need to hire a youth pastor.
Right.
We need to hire a senior pastor. We need a job description for that. And so people go to Google,
right, of course,
and they rip off somebody else's. And it's like, hey, that sounds good. So let's slap that up there,
Right.
and so it communicates something that doesn't necessarily, communicate what it is that they're looking for. And so that's where that confusion all kind of comes in.
So how do you, I mean, you do this for churches all the time. How do you help churches avoid that pitfall? How, getting back to process,
Yeah.
what process does a church go through to make sure that they're actually putting out the thing that they want to come in?
Yeah. So here's what we talk about when we talk with churches, right? We're encouraging churches to look for 5 things. Okay. We call it the 5 factors of a long-term healthy fit. And so much of what we're trying to do is get somebody in place for 5 years.
Right.
Now, I'm just going to tell you this up front. People are going to say, that this stuff is no-brainers, but I'm also going to tell you churches don't do this.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So here's what we're looking for. We're looking for theological alignment.
Right.
Okay. We're making sure that Wesleyans aren't going to Presbyterian churches.
Right.
That Pentecostals aren't going to, like, I don't know, John MacArthur's cessationist church. Right.
Right.
It's just those things that never work.
Right.
Now, it's, everybody says, oh yeah, we do that. But the trick of it is so many of our tribes in Christianity use the same things to mean such different things, right?
Like the same words or descriptors.
Same words. Like, spirit filled in one tribe is going to mean something way different,
right,
to the Pentecostals than it will for, again, John MacArthur.
Of course. Yeah.
But job descriptions say we want somebody who's spirit filled.
Right. Yeah.
We want somebody who can preach biblical sermons. Okay.
Right.
What's a biblical sermon?
Right.
Some of the words that we use have become trite.
Right.
And so one of the things that, a church needs to do before even launching a search is saying, okay, so theologically, what are our closed-fisted issues, right? What are those things that we will not budge on? Is it covenant baptism?
Right.
Is it believer baptism? What, is it, where do you stand on women in ministry? Where are you on the Reformed and Arminian spectrum? Those types of things. And realize, what it is that you're holding to that are closed-fisted. And then what are those open-handed issues where if there's a little bit of, wiggle room, if somebody leans one way and we lean the other way, but we're not angry about it.
Right.
What are those things that we're okay with? And so the theology piece is huge. And frankly, most churches don't sit down and think through this. Okay. So get an understanding of your theological non-negotiables up front and make sure that you're clear on those and make sure that you communicate those in a way that is clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that spirit-filled to you means, oh, they need to speak in tongues at least 4 times a day or whatever that means. Right. But so that's the first piece.
Okay.
Second piece for us is a cultural fit, a cultural alignment. Okay. And we look at this 2 ways. The easy one is geographic, right? Is somebody going to fit into our geographic culture? And that's fine. If that's not there, I mean, that's something that's overcomable. It just makes things a little difficult, but most people can adapt culturally. I mean, that's, we're called to mission, right? The bigger piece for us is, what type of church culture do you have? Okay. Because here again, we're looking for a pastor to lead us. Well, that means one thing in a Baptist congregationally led, where the congregation votes on everything type of a church.
Right.
And something totally different in, a strong pastor led church where the pastor's word is basically rubber stamped by everybody. Right. So again, we use the same words for that stuff, but understand what your church culture is. Entrepreneurial church planner type leaders typically don't work well in super congregational churches where everything is voted on by committee. We've also seen where people go from like larger churches to smaller churches, And that's a pretty rough step. The church gets excited because it's like, oh, they've been at that 5,000 member church, and it's been awesome, and they've been leading worship there. And what they don't realize is that at that church, they've been leading worship. They may have been the worship pastor, but they've also had somebody that's been designing sets for them. They've had a whole separate team, probably paid, that runs all the tech stuff, may have paid musicians, all that kind of stuff. Going down to a church of 500, all of a sudden they're going to be the ones that are designing sets, that are going to be, running tech, all that kind of stuff. And so that's a pretty significant step down too. So understanding the culture that you've got is super important. And a lot of times we got to remember that we're blind to our own culture. Sure. It's like a fish in water, it's just there.
Yeah.
Third thing, personality, that makes a ton of sense for people. God has fearfully and wonderfully made us. We've all got quirks. Some of our quirks, are livable with in certain churches. Yeah. In other churches, those quirks are going to cause a hostage situation, right?
I just love how you said that. So you just don't think. I think a lot of people don't think about that stuff. Yeah. We just sort of interject just because I just love that point so much. We ran a landscaping company for quite a while here. Mm-hmm. And although we would definitely look a resume and go, can you cut the grass? Can you lay something? The biggest thing that we would look at is, can I spend 8 hours a day in a truck with you for 6 months? Because if I can't, I don't care how good at this job you are. Yeah. Somebody's going to fly out the door while the truck is moving, and it's probably not going to be me.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a huge piece.
Yeah. And the beauty, the thing here is, it's much more painful to have to pay for a lawyer,
Right. Yeah.
after you've done something horribly bad, in reaction to this, than it is to wait another 6 months for the right youth pastor.
Right.
And so, yeah, the personality thing is huge, and if you're saying bless their heart, or if you're saying, oh, they'll outgrow that during interview weekends, they won't, they're on their best behavior there. So the fourth thing, right? Fourth thing is skill set. Have they done the job? Have they trained for the job? Can they do the job? Are they ready to step up? That's the easy part, right? That's a no-brainer, and that's typically the first thing that people go to anyhow. So don't need to spend much time there. Fifth piece for us is chemistry, right? Is this somebody that you want to have over, Tuesday night for barbecue? Is this somebody that, you want doing your daughter's wedding,
right?
Or sitting by your bedside, at the hospital? Is this somebody that for the next 5 years you're kind of looking forward to it? Or is this somebody that, you see their car in the church parking lot as you drive in, and you're just going to sit out in the car for an extra 30 seconds, kind of stealing yourself?
Right.
You've been there. So those are the 5 things that we look for. Okay. Here's what most churches do.
Okay.
Right. This is what most churches do. Most churches look at skill set, and then they look at chemistry. Right. And so they get the resume, they say, oh, that's a good church. Oh yeah. They've got all the stats and the metrics and the numbers on their resume. Of course they can do the job. Right. So let's interview them. And then, you get them in an interview, and it's like, oh, hey, I laugh at their jokes. Oh, he reminds me of my nephew, or something like that.
Right.
And you get far along in the process, and there might be this nagging feeling in the back of your head. It's like, hey, I know that church theologically, they're different than we are, but it'll be fine.
It'll be okay. What's the worst that can happen?
He's got dimples, and all that kind of stuff. Right. And sure enough, you can't overcome theological mismatches, cultural mismatches, or personality mismatches. You might get 18 months, and then all of a sudden the frustration sets in. And then for the next 18 months, somebody's, actively looking for jobs, or you're actively looking to fire them. Right.
And that's not a good feeling at all. I don't know if you watch, and I don't know if this is something you feel like too, and this is going off base a little bit. It's just something you said made me think of it. I've run into a lot of those Gary V videos before, like, that guy, he talks a lot, and, you kind of have to, talks a lot about staffing and whatever. And sometimes you have to put it really quiet around the kids because he swears a lot, but But one of the things that he said is too, that a lot of times people know right away whether it's a good hire or not. Like, like within that first 3 months, but because we're the church, we go, well, just kind of like what you said, like, well, we kind of swallow it, and we know it's not right, but we feel like, we're here now, we have to keep them. How do you, when a church goes through those pieces, those 5 pieces, they think they've got it right, but at the end they know that they just missed it. How does a church deal with that? Like, I know we just took a total left turn. I'm so sorry.
So this is good. So one, if you really do your homework on those 5 things, you're not going to miss it.
Okay.
I'll start there. But if you get in place and you need to apologize, you need to give them a really good severance package, and you need to end that relationship.
Right.
Okay. That doesn't sound very Christian. One of the things when we first started, we used to give like a 2-year guarantee, right? It's going to work out. And if it doesn't work out in 2 years, well, we cut that to 1.
Right.
Mostly because we wanted to encourage churches. Hey, if this isn't going to work, don't hang on for 2 years of coaching.
Right.
You need to pull the plug in that first 12 months. Otherwise, it is going to cause you more trouble. So, this is one of those things, hire slow, fire fast.
Right.
It sounds, it sounds unholy. It sounds, not Christian like, but if you know that it's not going to work, you need to let that person go figure out what is going to work.
Right.
You need to let them go before they're so frustrated that it does significant harm to them,
right?
But also before it does significant harm to your organization, because somebody who's not able to do the job, somebody who's culturally just not a good fit and makes things awkward and makes people have to sit in the parking lot for an extra 30 seconds in the morning,
which is not a good feeling.
That drags down the whole organization.
Yeah,
and people can feel it on Sunday morning,
right?
Right.
But we're so good at hiding it. What are you talking about? Nobody knows.
No,
nobody knows.
You know what? I tell you what, my wife, Teresa hates going to new churches with me.
Okay.
Because within the first 30 seconds of a service, I can tell if the worship guy and the senior pastor like each other.
Oh no.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, well, okay, a little bit, but not in the same way. So, okay, so what do you see when you see that? So you've got an eye for that. What kinds of things can you see, and what are visitors seeing then?
It's not seeing, it's a sense, right? You feel it. It's heavy.
Right.
You feel it as you walk in. Volunteers are either really engaged, right, and genuinely feel like they're ready they're excited to see you, and they're excited to be there.
Right.
Or there's this sense of, oh, I signed up for this and I didn't, I felt bad. It's like jury duty, right? It's like, I couldn't get out of it this week, and you get that sense, or when it comes to like staff relationships, you can see, do people genuinely like each other when they're on stage? And I don't, it's hard to kind of figure out exactly what it is, but we all deep down, we've got a sense of, those two guys don't like each other very much. They're faking it for the good of the, and the smile's just a little too plasticky.
Right.
We can sense that. And that puts that casts a shadow over the whole service.
Yeah.
It's typically, you can tell pretty quickly it's worship and senior pastor, and then senior pastor and executive pastor if you're in a church that has those 2 roles.
Right.
Those 3 roles, if they don't get together and they're not, they don't like each other and they don't work well together, man, the whole church feels it and knows it, can't put their finger on it, but they know something is off kilter and out of sync.
Right.
Right. So.
And again, this is why I like talking to you, because we just, the best conversations that get recorded like this are the ones where you have, 6 questions, you ask the first one, and then we just talk for an hour.
And then you never hit any of the others. Yeah.
I was talking to an EP, to an executive pastor, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, because it's a skill set that I've wondered about for myself before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just said, what are the things that you would advise? And one of the things that he said, 2 of the things that he said, and maybe you can expand on this, because I feel like that EP role is a really hard role.
Yeah.
He suggested one, it's really helpful if you have a relationship, like the person that's going into that role has a relationship with the senior pastor first.
Yep.
Like, because there's already that pre-built trust that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part is that EP just really needs to comfortable sitting in that number 2 chair. Like they need to love that number 2 chair.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I don't know where these relationships fall apart. But like, as somebody who's done the role and then puts, job descriptions together for that role, can you talk about that role just for a minute and how the dynamics of that team are different, maybe from any other 2 staff positions?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of, it's a trust relationship, right? And that's the big thing. A good executive pastor is going into that role knowing, hey, I am not the guy.
Right.
I don't want to be the guy.
Right.
I never will be the guy here.
Right.
My job is to support and defend and care for and be honest with the senior. Right.
Right.
And so, and realize that, the executive pastor needs to be willing to fall on their sword.
Right.
And if they're, so going into those roles, I've been executive pastor of a few different churches. One of them I had to leave because I got to the point where I did not trust the senior pastor, right, just for some decisions that were made. And it's like, I could, and so much of our mentality is we need to fight for justice and I'm right. And I gotta, no.
Right.
If there's horrible sin issues, right? If there is, moral failures and that kind of stuff going on, that's one thing.
Right.
But, other types of, maybe wisdom issues, not moral, type of disqualify for ministry type things. That's a little bit different. And so my job was to serve well, was to protect the honor of the senior pastor, was to execute, the job description that I had, and to play, kind of a confidant and a strategist role and a speak into type of a role and be honest. But also, at the end of the day, my job was not to go out and lobby for my agenda.
Right.
My job was to speak truth, be okay with it if things went a different way, and go out and lobby for the agenda of the senior pastor. That's tough.
Yeah.
Because we don't celebrate culturally those roles.
Right.
We celebrate, we all have this aspiration of being the guy up on the platform that, and gets all the adulation and all that kind of stuff. The XP role is kind of like a janitor, go clean up the messes, go fix the pipes, go execute on things and let somebody else get the glory, for lack of a better word. And if you're not comfortable with that, don't bother, because it's going to cause more trouble. Right. And so, there's times when we need to step back and walk away for the good of the church, because that season of serving, in that XP role for that time is done. And there's other times when you just keep going, Right. So I don't know if that answers what you're asking, but I think it's a different mindset.
That's great. It's just a totally different, growing up, I knew a lot of associates, but I mean, associate and executive pastor, probably some things that are similar, but a little different. So the 5 things that you said that we go through, for me, that 5th one, chemistry, and that relationship between a senior pastor and an executive pastor, if they don't know each other yet, or if it's somebody from outside the organization, how do you make sure those 2 pieces fit well? Because that's going to be the most important working relationship. Right?
You've got to hire slow in general, and you really need to hire slow on that one. Right.
Okay.
Now, when I'm saying slow, that doesn't mean take 4 years.
Right.
But what it means is, don't go through 3 interviews and say, hey, want the job?
Right.
Be intentional. And so where those work best, yes, you're going to have a search team. Right. Yes, you're going to have, a board speaking into this, but that senior pastor needs to, if not have absolute veto power,
right,
needs to be able to say, hey, I can work with this or I can't. I've heard horror stories of churches that have forced an executive pastor on a senior pastor, and that always works.
Right.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That works for about 3 months and then goes sideways pretty quickly after. Right. So, the senior and the executive to be, need to go spend some time together.
Right.
They need to go and spend time with their families together. Now, we're not saying, hey, they got to be best friends.
Right.
They got to go on vacations together and all that kind of stuff. Because no, if they do, that's nice. But what they need to be able to do is know that that they can trust one another. Right. When we're hiring for an executive pastor, we'll ask a pastor, okay, so what's going to trigger you in an XP? Right. What behaviors are going to trigger your insecurities and make you feel like they're working against you, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, for most people, it's the first time that they've ever thought about that.
Yeah, that's a great question for any staff position, right? Anybody who's going to work with each other. That's a good thing to know as a team when you're onboarding somebody new. That's a great question.
It terrifies people.
Yeah.
Because it requires us to get super honest with ourselves and really, really lean in. And if you as a senior leader don't know what triggers your insecurities, that knowing that stuff,
right,
will improve your ability to lead, exponentially.
Right.
If you can go figure some of that stuff out and then figure out how do I recognize when that's popping up, and how do I overcome so that I can think the best? Because as soon as those insecurities are triggered, if we're not aware of it, we're instantly going to start thinking, ascribing ulterior motives to somebody, and that's you can't come back from that.
Yeah. Wow. That's just I've never thought about that. I've never thought about asking that question. I think internally there's something that says, right, you're sitting in front of a candidate or a person, you're like, this person's going to bother me. But before that person is there to sit down and do that internal search, that is, that's just so big. That's worth the price of admission right there for me.
Yeah. See, and this is one of those things. Going back to the theme here, you can have the best interview questions ever, right? You can have the best job description ever,
right?
If there is such a thing,
right.
But if you're not doing the pre-work leading into the search, do we really need this job? What does this job need to be? If we move forward with this job, what areas do they need to do? That kind of thing, right? What is it that we need theologically in our church? What does our church culture require of somebody coming into it? What personality quirks are going to drive us up the wall? Those, if you're able to lay that stuff out, you're able to identify early on, is this person going to fit our culture? Is this person going to be a good fit for our team? Or is this going to go sideways quick? And that also, man, the beauty of that is once you do that work, once you do that foundational work, if you get somebody's resume, you can get a pretty good read on whether to move forward with them through that lens. With taking, and we encourage people to take about 30, maybe 45 minutes per resume. Okay. And instantly everybody hiring is just like, you want us to do what?
Yeah, that seems like a long time.
It is, but it saves you so much down the road, right?
Of course.
So, when we do this, we're able to do it a whole awful lot quicker because I do this every day, right?
Right, sure.
But for churches that, may do this once a year, may do this once every 3, 5, 10 years, however long, set aside 30 to 45 minutes. Look at, take this person's resume, look at the last church they served at, go dig into that church's website. Theologically, do they line up with where you guys are relatively closely? Right. Does their video, and everybody's got video now, right? Does their video of their Sunday morning service feel close to ours? Right? Does this feel like something that's going to fit? As we read the theological tradition of this church or of the school that they went to, does that line up? you're able to start to pick up on some of the things and say, hey, there's a mismatch here. Yes, the resume is pretty, it is well, it's got graphic treatment and all that kind of stuff. It's awesome.
Right.
Yes, they're a great communicator.
Right.
But their theological tradition doesn't line up with ours, or their style of preaching doesn't. They're more attractional. We want somebody who's exegetical,
Right.
or somebody that does verse by verse or whatever.
Right.
Spend the time on the resume, because, that's going to help you to put people into the no and maybe pile that look really good on paper. That would be a horrible fit for you guys, that you're going to be tempted to hire because of how good they look on paper. Right.
Right.
And so that doing that homework, laying down that intentional foundation early on and spending the time, man, it is going to save you so much frustration in the long run. So I feel like that was a hard pivot. We just kind of ended up there.
That was great. We're almost out of time here, so I'm gonna get you out of here on this.
Shocker.
I think well, I want to respect your time today. I think that the best piece of advice, if I were to say, hey, what's your best piece of advice? I think based on the theme that you've come across for the last hour, you would just say hire slow, right? Do your back work and hire slow. What's that next best piece? What's that you can't forget to do this?
Yeah. So let's say hire intentionally instead of slow. Here's the other thing, and everybody just needs to hear this now. Traditionally, churches have done a church-centered process. Okay. When they're hiring somebody.
Right.
Part of the reason we got into chemistry and we started chemistry was because we were tired of people getting kicked in the stomach by the hiring process.
Right.
One of the things that we constantly hear from people is that they've started to question their calling because of how churches have treated them in the hiring process. Okay. My last search, and this sounds more arrogant than I mean it to be, but it's like, I'm a good candidate, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I've got an MDiv, I've got an MBA, I've worked at some great churches, a couple decades of experience, and, my references are amazing. It's
sure. Well, you pay them well, and that's what
I pay them well, and they understand what happens. So I'm one of those geeky people that would put like a tracking pixel in the emails I sent out. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I put a tracking pixel in the emails I sent out with my resume. And of the ones that were open in my last search, 85% of those churches never sent me an email back.
Wow.
They never said anything like, hey, thanks for the resume. They never said, we hate you, go away. They never said, hey, we've already hired. Next steps are 85%. Okay.
Wow.
I'm a good candidate for an XP role.
Right.
Understand that this is the experience that most of the people that you're going to be interacting with have. Okay.
Right.
One of the best things that you can do is be intentional with your communication and make sure you communicate with everybody. Here's why. Have you heard the third space concept?
I have not.
Okay, so Starbucks,
Yes. Sorry. Yes, I have. Yes.
Well, for those who haven't, right? Starbucks, they went and they ripped off something from the church and made up millions and billions. Right. So their concept is that Starbucks, they want to be the third space. Everybody has their home life, that's their first space. They've got their work life, that's the second space, and the third space is their community space,
right?
Where people come together and interact, all that kind of stuff, right? So here's the deal: most people have those three spaces. Pastors, ministry workers don't. We don't have the luxury of having three spaces. Okay. Right. A minister's life.
That's true. That's a hard truth, but it is true.
Their work life, their community life, and their home life are one space.
They're all the same.
And if church is going bad, so is home life. So is community, right?
Yeah.
And so when you are talking to somebody, when somebody has the guts and the courage to send out their resume, you need to understand that they can't share what they're going through with their community, with their workplace. Right. They can with their family, but probably not with the 4-year-old because it's going to get out. Right. But, and most of the time with their older kids, they can't really share this outside of with their spouse. And so typically it's them and their spouse. And they're saying, we're about to blow up every sphere of our life right now in order to leave this job.
Right.
If it gets out to their community, if it gets out to their workspace, most churches are going to hand them a box.
Yeah.
And so they're alone. They may have a couple of mentors that they're working through this with, but for the most part, they're in a place where it is tough.
Yeah.
And so for them to send out a resume and not hear and get crickets,
right.
It's easy for us to say, am I really called? Right. If they send out a resume and you send them back a 17-page questionnaire that asks questions like, how healthy is your family?
Right.
Because you're trying to figure out, well, down here, they ask that question to figure out how much they're going to have to pay for health insurance.
Oh gosh.
Just tacky stuff like that, technically should be illegal, but it's church and you just kind of play the game.
Yeah.
If that's the first response, you're going to lose out on some of the sharper candidates.
Right.
We encourage you to do a candidate-centered approach, right? What does that mean? That means be proactive with communication. Have a communication schedule. You get a resume and you say, hey, thanks for the resume. Here's what the next step is. Here's when you can expect to hear from us by, and communicate, right? Let them know. So work that. Be honest with them. Be kind. Be compassionate, because the better you treat, the candidates that God has entrusted you with, and hear that, right?
Right.
God is entrusting you with candidates.
That's a huge thought. Who thinks about that? I mean, you do, but I've never even considered that before.
Yeah. In their vulnerability, they're reaching out to you to consider whether this is a potential job or not.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Shepherd them well, even if you have to say no.
Right.
And if you have to say no, say no.
Yeah.
And be kind when you do it, but communicate clearly, hey, this probably isn't going to be the right fit for you.
Yeah.
But shepherd them well. Not only does that, reflect well on you and make you a church that people want to be a part of and want to serve at, but frankly, it serves the church that they get hired onto well, because that's one less bad experience that they've got to go through therapy for, right?
Right.
And so, do that well. Best job interview of my life. Okay. Best job interview of my life. 15 minutes into it, the executive pastor looks at me and says, hey man, I think you're incredibly sharp and talented. I'd love to have you on the team, but this is not the right job for you.
Right.
We are looking for somebody with this skill set. Here's your skill set, and this is why it doesn't work.
Wow.
And it's like, thank you.
Yeah. You see
Thank
me.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get me, you've invested in me, but you've been clear. Right. And so many times we get afraid of being mean that we're not clear. And so to be unclear in this process is to be unkind and do damage. And so be clear with people, be kind, but understand that you have a responsibility as the church to shepherd these guys well, because they're in a hard spot. And so have a little bit of compassion there and make it, be as candidate centered as you can possibly be, because that's going to reflect so well on you guys, and it's going to keep the really strong candidates in your process until you make a decision. So
there's no better spot to end the advice than that. That's incredible. Talk about chemistry for a minute. What do you do? How do you help people? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So chemistrystaffing.com. That's the easiest place to find us. There's all sorts of resources on there. We've got a bunch of playbooks if you're going through a search process, and we'd love to be able to give those to you to work through it. We basically we're helping churches find people that are going to be in place for 5 years or longer. I mean, that's the goal. So we do some coaching as well and all that kind of thing, but our core business is search, and we'll work with churches to help them find their pastor, their executive pastor, all of that kind of thing. So do churches get a hold of you? Can candidates get a hold of you too? How does that work? Just anybody who's looking, or? Yeah. So just for clarity's sake, churches pay our bills, right? Churches make sure that I can pay for the air conditioning in January down here in Orlando.
Oh, don't even.
You're welcome.
We've got the natural air conditioning right out here. You can come up and check it out.
Yeah. I'll wait till July. So yeah, churches, we work for churches, but we're always looking for candidates. We're always looking for people that are looking to make a transition. And, if you look at our database right now, there's like 10, maybe 15,000 people in our database that are looking for jobs.
Okay.
And I think we're working with maybe 50 or 60 churches right now. And so we wish that we could place everybody. We try as hard as we can to make this process as human as possible. We're not perfect.
Right.
But if candidates are looking, one of the things that we try to do is if we say no to somebody before they get to the interview stage, we try to make available one of our coaches just to have a quick conversation to get a sense of where they are. And so happy to do that. Wish we could do it for everybody. Wish we were perfect, but there's only so many of us, and we do our best, if that makes sense. So
yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for that. We're going to put all those links to everything that you talked about and your contact information attached to this episode so that people can get a hold of you if they're looking or their church is looking. Just an unbelievable. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you triggered something there. So if you are kind of getting to a point where you're in process, one of the things we've got and I'll give you the link for this. One of the things on our website that's super helpful is we've got a couple books. One's called Before You Go and one's called When to Leave. Okay. Wade Hodges wrote these years ago, and I think they're probably the best resources for people contemplating transition. He has gifted those to us to be able to give out to pastors. Wow. I mean, incredibly, incredibly generous of him. Right. And I tell people all the time, if you read this, grab a box of tissues, read it with your spouse. And remember, it's a PDF, so don't go throwing it across the room because that's expensive, right? But it's a bunch of questions that we need to be thinking about, before we make a jump. And so, that resource is there too for if you're in that transition. And I hope you take advantage of that if you're thinking through that. So
very cool. Well, Matt, thanks so much. I hope we get to do this again sometime. I know you and I are going to stay connected, but for everybody who had the benefit of listening to you for the last hour or so, this has just been huge. So thanks so much for doing it. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Anytime, Mike. I really appreciate it. Really love what you're up to too, and the churches that you're getting to serve. So thank you for your work.
Thanks, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
All right.